The Country Doctor. Dennis Rasher was watching his favorite murder investigation show on a streaming service when he heard the scream. It was a blood-curdling scream he had heard many nights in his apartment. It came from the apartment across the hall. An old witch lived there, and he knew the situation. She was not right in the head and had been off of her meds, according to her daughter. The landlord in non-emergency had not been able to combat the clear violation of noise ordinances, so Dennis had to live with the blood-curdling voice which screamed and screamed, usually for an hour at a time before it faded into loud discourse, which she most likely had with a wall. An ad appeared for that silly insurance company with their silly commercials, and then another one for cereal. And finally, before his program returned, he saw a local ad for a country doctor. The man said, "Have mobility issues? No problem. Can't travel far? No worries. We got you. Call the country doctor today. We specialize in dementia patients and those with brain issues like MS and TBI." The ad went on. So did the screams. Dennis continued watching his show until he heard a knock. It was the old witch. She was mumbling incoherently with loose dentures and parts of her graying hair stuck in her mouth and her shirt half off. She had snot coming out of her nose, and it was an unpleasant sight to see. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you're not making any sense." Dennis pitied the old woman. She strutted off frustrated. Dennis closed the door. Finally, it came to the close of the night when Dennis couldn't keep his eyes open and yawned too much. He went into a dreamless sleep after her screams had finally faded. He texted his girlfriend before that he hadn't heard from all day a very good night. He felt like he soon woke up, but it had been 7 hours. "Why am I so tired?" he asked himself. Moments later, he got dressed and brewed some coffee with his breakfast. He noticed something strange in front of his door. It was a note written in scribbled cursive. It read like ravings of a madman. Something about a girl named Susanna who baked pies by the coast. He tossed it in the wastebasket, not thinking it could be of any importance. Mr. Rasher straightened out his tie and shirt and grabbed his keys to leave his apartment and lock up. In the hall, he saw a familiar man leaving the witch's apartment. "Now I know I've seen him before," Dennis thought to himself. He couldn't remember where, but he knew it was not in the apartment complex. As he neared the lobby of the apartment building to exit out into the hustling, bustling city streets, he remembered. It was the cheesy country doctor from the advertisement. Pfft, Dennis chuckled to himself, taking a gulp of coffee as he started walking the 4 blocks to his job as an electronics sales clerk. The country doctor had been wearing a black hat and black suit and black gloves. He had a briefcase and a cane. He really played the whole bit. Dennis found it strange and funny and also thought to himself, nobody can help that old witch. Maybe the country doctor can. Ha! He worked his shifts in the air-conditioned electronics stores, making his usual high amount of sales and ranking it well amongst his team. The sun had started on one side of the storefront and finally neared the horizon on the other side. It was time to close up shop and go home. It was time for more popcorn, ice cream, and murder shows. "Take care, Ronald," Dennis told his boss. They were the last 2 in the building. Dennis gathered his coat and briefcase and started his short walk home. He was tempted to stop for a coffee in the lobby cafe of his apartment building and he leaned into his temptation as he pulled out his wallet and ordered a vanilla oat milk cappuccino. He pretended to read a few chapters of his book while watching the city life outside the cafe window. He saw that familiar face again as he finished reading and drinking his coffee. In fact, the two gentlemen shared an elevator up to the third floor where Dennis Rasher had lived a good portion of his years. The country doctor was a very quiet man. "So you're the country doctor that I see on those ads." The man in the black gloves reached for his hat and tipped it with a smile. "I hope you're the best with Miss Anderson," Dennis said, half joking inside, but genuinely also hoping that the country doctor could at least get her to stop screaming. The country doctor nodded and got off the elevator first. It was an awkward walk together to Dennis's apartment, where he bid the doctor farewell, as the doctor stood outside of the witch's apartment across the way. "Now it's time to snack and watch Cold Case Killers." Dennis spoke aloud to an empty apartment. Empty since Christmas. He had missed his cat he raised since childhood. The orange tabby named Gilbert had kept him company for so long, and now Dennis was all alone. He wasn't ready to get another cat. Though 7 months had passed since Gilbert's death, he had yet to dispose or donate his litter box and toys and food bowls. He set down his briefcase and undid his tie, almost expecting his dead cat to come play with his dangling tie as he bent down to untie his tight, poorly fit shoes. He remembered his place in solitude. It was a sad moment before he finally settled down into his recliner to watch his show with some microwave popcorn. The bowl rattled with kernels as he set it on the coffee table. His Friday night had begun. The first episode he watched was about a town near where he grew up. In fact, he had heard about this case. The victim was a cousin of one of his schoolmates. Their arm had been found in the Cumberland River. Soon after, a leg. Finally, they found a skull. It was enough to ID the body. A body of a missing 17-year-old high school senior had flooded the news when this case had been opened so many years ago. The episode ended as the narrator said his famous catchphrase, "But the case had never been solved. It remains a chilling case, a cold case. Next on Cold Case Killers." Dennis left the television as some ads played. He went to the kitchen to scoop out some ice cream into a bowl. No screams tonight. "Unable to leave home for your medical visits?" an ad blared from the television. Perhaps the country doctor did right by her. Dennis's Friday night was peaceful. He fell into a deep sleep. That is, until 5 a.m. rolled around and the inevitable blood-curdling screams of the old witch, Miss Anderson, began reverberating throughout the entire floor of the apartment building. "God, that woman," Dennis scoffed. "Can't even sleep in on my Saturday off," he said aloud to the empty bedroom of his barren apartment. He decided to go to his balcony where he couldn't hear her screams. He pulled out a gift from his cousin who had visited a week before from New York. It was a 1-gram joint of reefer, indica to be exact. "This will put me back to sleep." He discreetly lit it and watched the dark sky begin to pale with the rising sun as birds began to chirp and the sounds of cars began to flood the nearby streets and highway ramps. This was when Dennis Rasher saw something he wished he could unsee. It was the witch, Miss Anderson. She was wandering the complex parking lot below, stark naked. She was shouting something about a matchbox and a Helen. Dennis knew Helen was her daughter. He always wondered why Helen didn't put her in a caring home for the elderly. This was one of the reasons. Dennis quickly put out the joint and dialed 911. He told the operator the situation, and cops and an ambulance showed up 15 minutes later. They arrested the poor old witch and looked around her apartment. This was when more cops and vans showed up to Dennis's surprise. "What the hell?" he asked the cop who knocked on his door 20 minutes after Miss Anderson had been cuffed and put into the patrol vehicle and hauled away. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, Mr. The cop was a tall, butch woman with short blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She had a tattoo on her wrist of a poem that Dennis couldn't make out. "Rasher, Dennis Rasher. Now, Miss Anderson is a crazy old woman, but she does not belong in jail." He caught a glimpse of red inside her apartment as a forensic team opened her door across the hall, behind the cop who tried to focus Dennis's attention back to her. "Have you noticed anything strange around here lately?" "Nothing stranger than usual. She typically does this. I believe she has dementia, like some kind of early onset dementia. What in God's earth did y'all find in her apartment?" Dennis's curiosity itched and itched and itched at him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rasher, but I cannot disclose details of the case at hand. Here's my card if you think of something else." Dennis took the card and went to his balcony to watch the full parking lot filled with state vehicles and people in suits and uniforms of all sorts, thicken and thin as the hour passed by. As the last cop left the complex and Dennis was sure of himself, he pulled the joint back out. "What a day," he said. It was only 1 p.m. Later he made some brunch and coffee and decided to throw a load of clothes into the washer. It sloshed and sloshed until Dennis had to open the window to turn on his air conditioner to air out the humid, detergent-scented air. He fell asleep watching Cold Case Killers, the killers who kill but never get caught, as he sat in his comfy recliner, which did as it should, and laid him far enough back to rest his whole body while still being able to watch the television, even though his eyes had slowly shut halfway through the first episode he put on. He fell asleep and dreamed a dream which disturbed him. He remembered that there was a merchant selling clothes made of human skin. A whole row of purses, handbags, blouses, and jackets of stretched Homo sapien hide. He had woken up when he saw a lampshade, bearing the face of none other than the old witch. He woke up quickly from his disturbing slumber with that stretched, agonized look of Miss Anderson tattooed to his brain. I gotta get out of the house," he said, disgusted with himself for sleeping during the day, a habit he loathed in his younger brother, who still lived with their mom at the age of 27. Dennis was highly critical of him, with an unloving, unmoved heart towards his younger brother, Elliot. Dennis was a perfectionist to a fault, a hypocrite sometimes, but he was on a rigid schedule with a perfect credit score and snobbish opinion about everything. He never abused poor Elliot with his hands or feet, no. He abused him by never giving him the validation one needs from an older brother. Elliot could never be good enough in Dennis's eyes. Dennis got dressed in casual clothes and sneakers and decided to go to the bar. It was a small bar he used to drink with casual friends until he decided to cut them out of his life. He also cut out alcohol. For 5 solid years into his 40s, up into his mid-40s, Dennis slimmed down, worked out, ate healthy, and stopped going to bars. However, it was not a shock to him when he saw a familiar face at the bar he now sat at. "What you drinking?" "Oh, nothing, bartender. Sober for 17 years. Just here for a burger and to see if you know if Willard Holyfield is still around these parts." The bartender looked up at the mention of that name and pointed to the patio and said, "He's out there smoking as usual." "Thanks." Dennis took his number and paid his bill. He scratched his head a bit and went out to the patio where a bald old man with a wrinkled face and arms sat with a cigarette poking out from a large white mustache. "Well, I'll say, if it ain't Rasher." He coughed a bit as he took the cigarette out of his mouth with one hand. "Hi, Willard." Dennis was trying to get something he considered precious into his possession from Willard Holyfield. Mr. Holyfield owned a plant store. Dennis, as myopic as he can be, did love plants and animals with a genuine heart of care. The plant itself did not matter to Dennis, only if he could get a discount. The two men exchanged information. The afternoon passed into evening as Dennis filled his guts with deconstructed cheeseburger and fries and soda. Holyfield had sneezed on Dennis. Dennis laughed it off, but in his mind he yelled at the old man and broke his chair across his head. Dennis had a dark imagination and was infuriated. He did not act on it. He calmed himself and remembered he was a germaphobe. He was being irrational. He scolded himself, then forgave himself. By Sunday night, the plant had stayed alive in his kitchen next to the sink. It was an aloe vera plant. He grew up with one in his childhood kitchen sink. This was the way, he thought endlessly to himself. By 1 p.m., Dennis began to sneeze in fits. He had run out of tissues by 3 a.m. He had to call out of work sick for the first time in his life. "Ronald," he said, all stuffy-nosed and teary-eyed with an exhaustion of 1,000 years. The following few days were met in a stupor. He had dialed the number and got a busy tone. He tried again and again, once a day, as he got sicker and sicker. He puked, he gagged, he did all the things a person with severe flu does. He couldn't think straight. He began to wheeze when he breathed. He made his way to the recliner with a stowed-away bottle of whiskey. He had no medicine. He drank 3 shots worth before drinking a green tea with honey. His show ended 3 episodes in when he fainted in his comfy position. He passed out into a dreamless sleep, and 6 hours had gone by without his notice. "Huh? Do you have an illness and you can't leave the house? Call the country doctor." Dennis, in his hungover, ashamed, sick self, arose to get his phone from the coffee table. He made like he was about to crash into the floor, but he caught himself. He blew his nose on a t-shirt and cried as he called the cheesy advertisement's phone number. Finally, on Thursday, a female voice answered. "Thanks for calling the country doctor. Can I get your name, please?" "Dennis, Rasher. Dennis Rasher, sorry. No worries, Mr. Rasher. She sounded bright and giggly. Can I get your address and symptoms? And so he told her everything, and that day he got a knock at the door. He went to the door, and there he stood, the man in the black suit, black gloves, and black hat, wearing a gray cloth wrap as a mask. He introduced himself in a Swiss accent. Dennis exchanged introductions and relayed what he had told the receptionist. I'll tell you what to do. This country doctor, who never said what country he came from, spoke with enthusiasm. I want you to take this powder and 2 orange juice for 3 days. For 3 days and 3 nights. 6 doses should clear you right up. So Dennis heard. So Dennis followed. He had enough sick hours, and his boss Ronald had Dennis' best interest at heart by keeping his desk untouched. A week had slowly passed. Dennis felt great. The country doctor grinned. He made his way to the door. Dennis had high hopes for a book he ordered online. He was hoping the package had come. So he followed the odd doctor to the door. He closed it in front of Dennis, who didn't want to be awkward and chose to look out the peephole instead. He saw the package, but what he also saw had given him shivers and almost stupefied Dennis Rasher. He saw the man in old-fashioned doctor clothes enter the apartment across the way. The country doctor had left the door open for 7 seconds. It was long enough to see that the apartment had been rented out to none other than the doctor of no shame. For Dennis saw behind the mysterious man in black who had healed him a row of organs and faces on severed heads. He rushed to find the card that the officer had given him several weeks ago during the incident with the witch. She no longer screamed in the complex, that's for sure. However, Dennis had witness testimony available to exonerate her of all charges. Dennis had a hold of the cop by afternoon with a call back. The two exchanged information, and soon, well, you know the rest, dear reader. The moon began to rise as the crew of cops came to arrest the man across the way from Dennis Rasher. The body count ended up being 357. He had reportedly kept brains in the freezer and fed on them with occasional cuttings of other organs. Dennis read online about how the country doctor targeted the elderly, those in fevers and old age with poor judgment. He targeted those with dementia and Alzheimer's. He ate their brains. He ended up being put in a high security jail when they figured out he performed at-home lobotomies. The witch was not a witch, just a scared old woman. Just a sick lady who got her brain manipulated with domestic surgery. He would kill the victim and live in their apartment and move on to his next customer. With several customers he treated for money, he had 2 old people he was devouring that gray matter from. Dennis Rasher was astounded. That could have been him. He wondered this aloud as he looked over at a dead aloe vera plant in the kitchen. The night was a Friday, and Dennis turned on the television. I think I'll watch something funny. He turned on some cartoons. Soon he got a call. It was his girlfriend's mother. I haven't heard from her for a month. What gives? Dennis asked her, begging to know. About Sandra. She got ill, but she called at an home medical service. Turned out it wasn't a legitimate service. She got murdered. She got murdered. The woman sobbed on the phone as Dennis saw Bugs Bunny on the television scream from a shower like an embarrassed naked woman. He forgot about the powdered tonic he took for 3 days and 3 nights. He dropped the phone, forgetting everything he had heard. Dennis Rasher began to laugh. He laughed until he cried, and then let out a blood-curdling scream at 4 a.m. He laughed and screamed some more.